Welcome again, everyone. I'm Michael Berkman, Professor of Political Science and Director of the McCourtney Institute for Democracy. Welcome and thank you for joining us. The Brown Democracy Medal ceremony marks the moment each year when we celebrate the innovators, protectors, and stalwart partisans of democracy, not only here in the US, but around the globe. Last year's winner was Nasrin Sotoudeh, an Iranian lawyer and human rights activist who has been called Iran's Nelson Mandela. A longtime opponent of the death penalty, Nasrin co-founded an organization to advocate for legislation that would end capital punishment in Iran. During the pandemic, she launched a 46-day hunger strike to protest poor health conditions and the risk of COVID-19 in Iranian prisons. And because of her work, Sotoudeh has been repeatedly imprisoned by the Iranian government for crimes against the state. Currently, as we understand, she and her husband, Reza, are both under house arrest. For more than a decade, we've been honoring partisans for democracy and freedom, and it's a great honor to be here again this year. Before we present this year's medal, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge Tracy and Ted McCourtney, the Penn State benefactors whose transformational gift gave the McCourtney Institute for Democracy its name and ensured that we will be able to continue our important work. Always great to have you here, Tracy and Ted, and thank you for all your support and generosity. And now it's time to pass the mic to Larry Brown, who, along with Lynn, established the Brown Democracy Medal. Larry? How you doing?
Afternoon, everyone. Happy Halloween. It's great to be with all of you as we celebrate the start of the second decade of Brown Democracy Medal winners. I'm Larry Brown, and it's a real honor and pleasure for Lynn and I to be able to participate in these events. While this second decade of award winners will undoubtedly introduce all of us to new faces, new groups, and new ideas and ideals, all intended to advance the cause of democracy, some things won't change. I'm still going to express Lynn's and my appreciation to the people who brought us to where we are today. Two deans, Susan Welsh and Clarence Lang. Susan was the driving force behind so many learning centers that have become institutions at Penn State. The McCourtney Institute for Democracy, the Richard Civil War Era Center, and the Rock Ethics Institute, just to name a few. Hers is a lasting legacy, and it is hard for anyone to walk in her shoes. But if anyone can, it's Clarence Lang, who has picked up where Susan left off and offered nothing but great leadership and inspiration. The Institute for Democracy has had two directors who Lynn and I have been fortunate to work with, John Gastel and Michael Berkman, who have set the Institute on an innovative and forward-thinking path. And a thank you not only to Michael, but to his partners in the Institute, Chris Beam and Jenna Spinelli, each of whom is invaluable in making the Institute the effective voice it has become. And of course, Ted and Tracy McCourtney, who have been an ever-present source of inspiration and generosity, not only for their role in the formation of the McCourtney Institute, but for so many other programs and projects around Penn State that would not have gotten off the ground without their involvement. Thank you all. I don't need to tell any of you here that we're living in a world that finds itself at a time of great political and civil unrest. It's been nearly 3 years since Russia's full-scale military invasion of Ukraine, with no indications of a ceasefire. Early this month marked the first-year anniversary of the brutal 2024 Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and the United States continues to face a polarized and paralyzed political system and an embittered public. We're just days away from the 60th presidential election in our nation's history, an election that will determine the country's direction on contentious issues including the economy, gun policies, women's reproductive rights, and immigration. This is why acknowledging and appreciating these warriors who advance new ideas, oftentimes while flying under the radar and against what seem like insurmountable odds, is so compelling. And let me ask you, who flies under the radar more than an invisible university? Today it is my great honor to announce that this year's recipient of the Brown Democracy Medal is the Invisible University for Ukraine. War upends nearly every aspect of life for the citizens caught in the conflict, including access to higher education and the opportunity to develop the skills and dispositions necessary to participate fully in democratic life. Invisible University for Ukraine is an initiative of Central European University that offers online courses as well as on-site classes in Budapest and Vienna for Ukrainian undergraduate and graduate students, whether residing in Ukraine or in refuge, whose studies have been affected by the war. Its name alone evokes the various 19th and 20th century underground and exile educational initiatives, such as the Flying Universities in Eastern Europe, as well as the tradition of invisible colleges formed after 1989 in the region. Launched in spring 2022, just months after Russia's initial invasion, more than 1,000 Ukrainian students have taken courses taught by hundreds of faculty from across Europe and beyond. Accepting the Brown Democracy Medal on behalf of the Invisible University for Ukraine are Balázs Trencseny, IUFU organizer and professor of history and lead researcher of the Democracy and History Project at Central European University's Democracy Institute, and Natalia Shulikova, student assistant at the Invisible University for Ukraine and a student at Yale University. It is my distinct pleasure to present this year's Brown Democracy Medal to the Invisible University for Ukraine. Come on. This is just the stand, okay? This is actually it.
Let's take it together.
Somebody's taking it, I'm not taking it back.
Let's take a picture.
Michael?
All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Thank you.
Dear distinguished audience, ladies and gentlemen, dear students and colleagues, it's a great honor for us to be with you today and receive the Lawrence and Lynn Brown Democracy Medal conferred by the McCartney Institute for Democracy. It comes in a moment that is loaded in multiple ways when it is important to reflect together on the meaning and perspectives of democracy, locally in the United States and globally alike. We are meant to participate in a festive occasion. We were smiling a second ago, but there is very little reason for self-complacency. First of all, let me pause for a moment to commemorate those Ukrainian scholars and students who cannot be with us. Back in 2023, Natalia Shulikova, who is standing here with me, was involved in bringing to Budapest and Vienna an exhibition called Unissued Diplomas about those Ukrainian university students who tragically died in the war, most of them accidentally, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, so to say, while some of them defending their country with arms. Even then, the list was tragically long and getting longer every day. I would like also to evoke those Ukrainian colleagues co-organizing the Invisible University, who for various reasons could not travel to meet you here today, especially the director, Ostap Sereda, and of course many of the students involved, both as beneficiaries but also as co-creators of the pedagogical process. You will see some of the rejoinders soon in the videos they prepared for this occasion, so you will see a little bit the collective spirit, not just our kind of master narrative, so to say. You will see some of them, and I would start now asking Jenna to show a little bit of a short clip with Ostap.
Dear distinguished audience, dear colleagues, friends, I am Ostap Sereda, a co-organizer of the Invisible University for Ukraine. I am both honored and humbled by this award. It's an important act of recognition and support for Ukrainian students in the international community of scholars who tried to build this academic project and promote critical and informed discussion in spite of and against the terrorizing threat of the war aggression. The Invisible University for Ukraine was initiated in March 2022, immediately after the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, by a group of scholars and students affiliated with the Central European University. It was an attempt to open the safe, productive and stimulating academic space of the Central European University to Ukrainian students and scholars. But we would not be able to continue it beyond a semester if we could not rely on benevolent involvement of hundreds of colleagues from many university centers in Europe, North America, and beyond. I think the main experience of the Invisible University for Ukraine is the understanding that the academic project can strengthen resilience against the damage, against the shock of this unprecedented war. Through this project, we learned that intellectually reflexive pluralism is a very efficient instrument to resist this shock. Hard times are the best times for action, wrote one of our students in his feedback, and it's amazing what this cohort of students can accomplish. War became a multifaceted challenge that this generation has to take on. And your support is important for helping this generation to overcome this challenge.
I myself come from a country, not from Ukraine as a matter of fact, but from Hungary, which became visible in the public discussion in the US lately as an example of how the erosion of liberal democracy can give birth to a new political configuration, usually described as hybrid regime, where political elites are not interested anymore in sustaining institutions which make it possible to control and eventually replace them. To the contrary, their main preoccupation is to bend all these institutional frameworks to their benefit, capture the economy, repress social discontent, and eventually also enter the private life of citizens. Paradigmatic targets of these hybrid regimes everywhere are universities, as academic freedom, no matter how ambiguous, even in good times, think about the dependence on state, often on private funders, which makes sometimes political streamlining, provides intellectual and institutional resources to sustain the plurality of political and cultural imaginary. It is not by chance that one of the most resounding cases that was exactly the campaign against the Central European University in Budapest in 2017-18 by the Orbán government, realizing that the US government after the 2016 election will not intervene to defend an US accredited university from persecution. So as a result, the university mostly moved to Vienna, as you probably know. The need for uncommon institutional responses to the outbreak on higher education has been a recurrent topic of discussion since the late 2000s. Throughout Central, Eastern, and Southeastern Europe, it has become obvious that successful convergence with an idealized Western model was an increasingly problematic aspiration. So in the 1990s, everybody wanted to copy American universities in Albania or in Hungary, but it became at some point clear that there are problems with just copying this model. This democratic backsliding was partly to blame, but there were also growing doubts about the relevance of this classical Western academic model in the present. These doubts were linked to the growing tension between three modes that together characterize modern academia: research, teaching, and public engagement. The autonomy of the university, let alone of research, has never been perfect, even in the so-called West. But there was a dialogical relationship between academics and society, characterizing post-Second World War North America and Western Europe. However, this model showed its cracks by the end of the 20th century. The Invisible University emerged as a response to this crisis of the academia, experimenting under the pressure of unprecedented situation of mass dislocation of students and scholars to relink the educational, research, and civic components in unconventional and innovative ways. So it is not just an emergency initiative, it's also an attempt to innovate. The emergence of this project in East Central Europe was also not accidental, in the sense that due to the history of the region, these alternative educational institutions have a strong track record in this part of the world. We can refer back even to the 17th century Moravian Protestant Jan Comenius, who was perhaps the first to formulate an identity of a scholar at risk, developing his conception of lifelong learning, innovative pedagogical techniques, and inclusive education for poor children and women. Absolutely accidentally, but maybe not accidentally, the Moravian College in neighboring Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, carries his legacy. In the late 19th century, also East Central Europe saw various attempts to link education and civil society in contexts where the imperial state was considered alien and often directly inimical. Notably, the Nobel laureate physicist Maria Sklodowska, or as you probably know, Marie Curie, emerged from this unofficial educational frameworks. There were also similar Ukrainian and other initiatives, and we already heard about the flying university model that was basically a model of the dissident intellectuals in the 1970s and 80s. IUFU thus both represents an emergency initiative reacting to a particular and hardly imaginable and unanticipated shock of an invasion, but it's also an attempt to basically rethink education and offer some sort of alternative model. We try to avoid the model of a single university offering its own classrooms to the Ukrainian students. So like it's when we talk about Central European University, it's just a very, very small part of the complexity of the institutional networks around us and the institutional solidarity. From the beginning, it was built on a network of inspired scholars of Ukrainian and non-Ukrainian background who wanted to contribute intellectual and other resources to the project. It was also important that we could build on a coalition of university institutions, both in Ukraine and abroad, including the Imre Kertész College in Jena, Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, Ivan Franko University of Lviv, Kyiv Mohila Academy in Kyiv, and many other institutions. This model of study was very inclusive from the very beginning. Many virtual classrooms were structured around the logic of panel discussion or workshop with 2 or even 3 invited guests. So you shouldn't imagine this in the traditional way that there is one professor and then students in the classroom. This is a very, very dialogical, very, very inclusive logic. It allows students to be directly involved into the discussion and to address and rethink the existing conceptual frameworks and paradigms based on their unique experience. It also demonstrated the power and importance of intellectual pluralism in addressing complicated issues. The most initially triggering issues, such as language practices and policies in Ukraine, or conflicting varieties of Ukrainian nationalism, turned into keys to better understand Ukrainian society and its historical legacies. They also opened gates to rethink things beyond Ukraine. IUFU thus is a collective venture, and its main pedagogical and ideological intuition is self-organizing and building all the programs together with the students. Hence, it makes little sense to talk about all this experience without the voices of the students themselves. As most of our classes are online, it is perhaps even fitting to listen to their voices and see some of them on the screen. They will talk to you about the experience of being in war, the ways to cope with it intellectually and emotionally, to be part of a community that goes beyond academic activities, but in some ways functions as a moral and emotional basis, and also the book project that was made possible by the Brown Medal. So you will see here 4 short kind of similar rejoinders by Denis Tereschenko, Olha Stasiuk, Yevhen Yashchuk, and Liana Bliharska.
I am Denis Tereschenko, and I am a doctoral researcher at the European University Institute in Florence, and a mentor and coordinator at the Invisible University for Ukraine. What I think is of perhaps utmost significance for IUFU is that it aims to reach out to the students who are currently in Ukraine, especially those who could not and cannot go to study abroad right now. With every year, with every month, the situation in Ukraine is getting dimmer. Despite the promised American military support and European integration, the front line is receding, the prices are rising, and the situation with energy supply promises to be extremely risky this winter, which might leave people without heating and electricity during the coldest months. Many educators, as well as students, have left the country. While IUFU cannot stop the war or direct huge funds to support Ukraine's critical infrastructure, what we can is help students and young scholars in Ukraine with what we have skills and resources to do, by offering education that is relevant for those who in the midst of the war, and thus by providing for students venues and opportunities to meet and continue thinking during wartime, but also about wartime. One particular thing that is important to me is that we let people in Ukraine know that they are not forgotten nor forlorn, and that despite the dire situation in which this war is going, there is always place for hope, solidarity, but also real help. I think that Brown Democracy Medal for IUFU is a tribute and recognition that people in Ukraine and students in Ukraine are not forgotten and not left on their own, under the open sky. The way the world is functioning now is increasingly fragile, as the erupting wars and conflicts around the globe unfortunately illustrate. To reach peace, Ukraine needs more support, and not less. Otherwise, it will be doomed to remain one of the world's open wounds.
Hi, my name is Olha Stasiuk. I am a PhD student at Central European University, and a coordinator of Invisible University for Ukraine. I'm deeply grateful for the Democracy Medal, which recognizes the effort of my colleagues and celebrates what we have been doing for the past 3 years. I do believe that Invisible University is a new model of teaching and learning and responding to crisis. My job here is to work closely with Ukrainian students. I speak to them every day, I listen to their needs, and they are amazing. They live through the most difficult events of their lives, and still they are eager to learn, to do the research, to produce knowledge. They want to become something more, not after the war, but here and now in the midst of danger. When we respond to their needs and when we respond to these gaps that were created in their education, I think we give them the opportunity of post-traumatic growth. And that's a great investment because they're already working hard to shape new Ukrainian society and influence what's going on. I hope that more Ukrainian students can be helped like that. And I also hope that more programs like Invisible University will appear all across the globe. We need to support our young generations in danger and give them the future that they deserve. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Yevhen. I'm a PhD student at the University of Oxford and the main student coordinator at the Invisible University for Ukraine. On this very nice occasion when we are celebrating our commitment to make difference amid the biggest uncertainty one can imagine, I'll take a minute of your time to reflect on what it means to deal with the war when there is a tiny window of opportunities available. Thanks to Balazs Trancheni, who is sitting among you today, I joined IUFU from its very beginning, in April of 2022. Being in Vienna then, I helped to create a system that brought students affected by war together to pursue their studies when missiles were falling on their hometowns. I didn't think what it meant when a missile hit a house or when your hometown is occupied. What mattered to me at the moment was how to help, despite being in a very uncertain position by myself. And IUFU became an ideal place for that. 2.5 years later, I'm still there, still trying to navigate the system that we created to help over 1,000 students as for now. I'm still in a very uncertain position, despite being privileged to study a degree in Oxford. I had to reinvent my identity several times over the past 3 years. And working on the IUFU book project became one of the most essential experiences for that. I still hope that you have a chance to read at least a couple of essays from the volume that we lived through this year. But there are also those who do not have chances to join things, because the war is turning the soil under their feet into the swamp that may suck the entire country. I have a vague understanding of what next months will bring us, but I know that I still will be involved, to give a hand when it's needed. It's my choice as a citizen of the country that is still fighting for its existence. I know that it means might be questionable, but as soon as there are people who can make differences, I believe that hope is still there. On that note, I'd only ask you to help us with that effort and make sure that this time next year, we will still have one more democracy preserved. Thank you.
In 2014, when the Russian-Ukrainian war broke out, I was finishing high school and preparing to start university abroad. In February 2022, when the same war began for the second time but bigger, I lived in Ukraine. I was researching topics related to the Second World War and worked at a local museum. Just 18 days before it, I defended my master thesis. On February 25th, my husband joined the army. I was 24 when I realized that I no longer see myself in academia. Being a historian felt all meaningless and hopeless. Everything was happening again and again. But later, I met the Invisible University for Ukraine project and realized what this initiative does. It gives young people hope that they can build, live and work in a democratic society, that their voices can be heard, and that their intellectual potential can be realized. When I received news about the award and an offer to contribute to this book, I felt skeptical. I still have a file on my laptop in which I wrote down explaining why I don't want to write this essay. Here are a few lines from it. In war, you grow up faster. One day, suddenly, it becomes hard to distinguish the truth. Then you start to feel the physical weight of your thoughts. They paralyze you because they can't stop. Every day spinning faster, new and old one mixed. One professor once said, "It's good to doubt." It would make me a good historian. Thank you. I remember a feeling of irony when doubting every second of your life drives you mad. Thinking it one of the most beautiful things here and now. Thinking during the war. Is it a privilege or a burden? I am a 26 years old PhD student in history, ready to research concentration camp and sift through archives, filled with denunciations written by ordinary people like me and you. But also I want to live and love. Is that so much to ask? I don't want my life to become the subject of my research. I don't want to write about this ongoing war or about democracy in it. But you want to read it, so please, sit back and enjoy. In the end, I have only one thing that I want to say. Please remember about the power of choice. The Second World War showed us what hatred, populism and inaction can do, what deportations, mass murders and totalitarianism are. I'm 26 and I want my peers to stop being killed. I want to discuss their works with them, not going into library and institutions named after them in memoriam. Thank you.
When we started to think about the relationship of democracy and war, also occasioned by this book project that was made possible by the award, there was a consensus among the students that democratic practices cannot be merely suspended and relegated to the post-war period. Rather than giving definite answers about what is democracy in war, discussions, for example, at the IUFU Winter School in 2024 January on state of emergency made it clear that the paradigms commonly used to navigate these problems in Western academia, often predicated upon an internal type of violence, so civil war basically, rather than full-scale war, are quite inadequate to describe the Ukrainian situation. There is very little experience actually in global thinking about how to have democracy in war, because usually you have total war doesn't really coexist with democracy. From this discussion, other questions followed about the distribution of the burdens of war, even of the burdens of death in war, the internal dynamic of the Ukrainian public sphere, the tension between the imperative of national unity and the plurality of positions and opinions, and the possibility of political dissent and action in wartime. What is it possible to protest in a moment of a war, for example? These dilemmas brought together a group of IUFU students into an essay writing seminar led by our colleagues Tetiana Zemlyakova and Guillaume Lanceron. It aimed to engage with the major issues of Ukrainian society, faced from the perspective of the students who began their university studies not much before the Russian invasion. I mean, most of the students we work with were basically 19, 20, in 22 years. So you can imagine they came out of COVID and they went into the war. And who were hit by the experience of the full-scale war precisely when they started to formulate their academic interests. In this sense, it became impossible to separate the scholarly and existential dimensions of their engagement. When they talk about the war, they talk about themselves. When they talk about themselves, they have to talk about the war. As the situation is unprecedented, there are no guidelines to follow. Thus, all contributors had to find their way to a chosen theme by formulating new questions and, in some cases, developing a new conceptual language and new authorial positions to express their ideas. There is no easy lesson to draw from all this, and I cannot resume the gist of these complex and personal contributions in a couple of sentences. I hope you will have the chance to read it when it becomes available in, I think, a couple of weeks. What is important is agency. Democracy is not a given, but something that you have to reconfigure and critically sustain day by day. This is, I think, a consensus of all our students, and I hope it's relevant for this audience as well. It is only sustained by participation. Choosing to opt out, even if existentially and morally often understandable, eventually legitimizes those efforts that aim at eliminating the democratic institutions. Let me thank you for your attention, and let me symbolically hand over to you the book, Invisible University for Ukraine, Essays on Democracy and War. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, Cornell University Press is not ready with printing it, so we cannot show it as a physical copy, but I think the electronic copy will be very soon on their website. Instead, let me pass the word to one of the contributors, Natalia, who will address you in the name of the authors and of the IUFU student community living now in the United States, so she didn't have to fly over from Europe. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Balazs, and I think I will start by saying that I'm a student from Ukraine. I did not have a chance to receive my education in Ukraine, so I started first in Vienna, Central European University, and then shortly after I fled to the States, where I'm now getting a degree in history at Yale University. And I think I will start my speech by reflecting on the book that was mentioned several times today already, Democracy at War, and it's not called so accidentally. So I believe that the strength of this book comes from its deeply personal perspective, so the lived experiences of the people who were caught in the war and they were pushed to take a choice to engage in the war and in the war for individuality, freedom, and freedom play, even though they didn't really have this choice whether to engage in it or not. In times like this, you seek ways to reflect on the daily realities that consume your life, and you try to make sense of the nonsensical through it. And I believe that the process of writing this book was an act of democracy itself. Through storytelling, through creating and reflecting together, we arrived at a powerful understanding. While writing this book, we found space to disagree on interpretations of democracy and freedom, yet still respect each other's views. In the end, we created a story that, while diverse, is united by a shared commitment to what we all value deeply. We also understand that the questions Ukrainian scholars are posing are not limited just to Ukrainian audience, and probably might be relevant for the non-Ukrainian community as well. Democratic life per se in Ukraine may be constrained by the war, but it is far from being in ruins or destroyed. It's upheld by the civic actors in Ukraine, by the armed forces of Ukraine, by the people who volunteer and who try to reintegrate veterans back into their civilian life and push for the ongoing research and civic engagement. These are the people whom I feel we have to first acknowledge when we say how democracy is now upheld in Ukraine during the full-scale war started by Russia. But we also have to acknowledge the international solidarity that enables this work on a consistent and normative level. The people upholding Ukrainian democracy during the war are spread across Europe, United States, and in Ukraine right now, actively working toward this goal. They're volunteering, monitoring institutions, and producing analytical work on the phenomena, really, of the social cohesion right now that appeared in Ukraine. Many of them are fighting in the armed forces of Ukraine, including Alexei Rudenko, whom you didn't have a chance to meet today or see a video today, exactly because he had to reduce or minimize his academic involvement to fight and uphold the democratic values that are central to the Western world. The choices we make as academics, thus, whether to support a Ukrainian educational initiative, to shop for elections, or how to shape discussions about Ukraine and the space that we give to these discussions, these choices influence the future of Ukraine's fight to preserve democracy. And I believe that the fight that Ukraine is now leading, in turn, is also a defense of democratic values that are central to the so-called Western world. And in this sense, our decisions are very deeply interconnected. Ukraine isn't the only nation defending democracy under the threat of the rise of authoritarianism right now. Today, the world recognizes that if Ukraine falls, Russia will then turn to Baltic countries, then to Poland, then to Georgia, and probably the rest of the world. And the economic and political implications will affect the whole world. Just as Ukraine's success is crucial for the future of global democracy, this war trajectory depends on the choices of its allies, especially the United States. Decisions like those in the upcoming elections will determine not only the near-term democratic trajectory of the United States, but will also determine whether the horrors of the forced deportations, identity erasure, and filtration camps can be stopped in Ukraine, or on the contrary will be allowed to spread further in Europe and beyond. While being in the United States, I often hear pessimistic predictions of what the future upholds, and I think it is tempting to say that democracy is in decline, but each new challenge only amplifies our responsibility to act. My dear friend and colleague Olga Stasuk, whom you saw she was the second one given a short video introduction, also contributed to this book. She demonstrates this commitment in her active work, volunteering work for the armed forces of Ukraine. And when I recently asked her anxiously, Olga, what should we do? How should we proceed? Because Russian troops are now only 13 miles from the Dnipropetrovsk region, which has never been occupied in this part of the war. She said, Natalia, this only means that there will be more wounded on that last stretch separating us from the loss of freedom, speech, and assembly. And that means that we have work to do to make sure they have the tactical medicine needed to survive. I think that her response holds a powerful lesson. Rather than becoming paralyzed by the big picture, we must focus on what is within our reach and taking personal and collective actions that matter. Thus, supporting Ukraine both military and in intellectual realms reinforces the commitment of safeguarding democratic identity, ensuring that both cultural continuity and resilience are part of our shared future. In academic terms, to support Ukraine, one needs to rethink how Ukrainian questions are approached in academic frameworks. This means moving beyond the outdated labels like post-Soviet and rethinking departments and curricula and actively incorporating Ukrainian scholars' perspectives. Rethinking the titles of the programs is just the beginning. We have to move further deeper and lasting changes, such as long-term funding for Ukrainian studies programs, tenured positions for Ukrainian scholars, and scholarships for Ukrainian students. These are essential efforts. Supporting Ukraine's defense on both the battlefield and in intellectual spaces reinforces the idea that fighting for democracy requires a multifaceted commitment. While we all strive for a victorious peace, so-called, defending academic freedom during the war becomes even more crucial. Ukraine's academic community faces a fight for survival. Universities and research institutions have been destroyed. Archives, museums, and libraries are evacuated or lost to fires. And daily work is now disrupted by the air raid alarms, missiles, and drone strikes. The role of knowledge-making now reaches beyond its inceptional goal of teaching and learning. Studying humanities or social sciences or even STEM majors is now becomes applicable and intertwined in applying these new insights to the urgent challenges like rebuilding Ukrainian cities or protecting human rights of civilians and soldiers. These issues, along with the natural academic curiosity, are what Ukrainian students bring to the virtual classroom every day. The Invisible University for Ukraine itself embodies both a response to preserve democracy and a sort of a practical training ground for democratic principles. Responsibility, after all, comes from the word response. Responsibility from intellectual engagement comes with the ability to respond. And in these times, where darkness, evil, and hope all collide, this response must drive meaningful change in academia and beyond. Thank you again for your time, and Slava Ukraini!
Well, thank you very much for representing such an incredible program, for giving us much to digest, and for the moving videos. Each of the students that you saw in the videos has a section of the book, along with many other students, I believe, as well. And the book will be open access shortly, I believe, as well as in hard copy. Now, we have time for questions, and so please just raise your hand, and Jenna will bring you the microphone, and we'll go from there. Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm.
First question?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
I'm still a little confused as to who sets up the curriculum. Do the students come to you and express their needs, or do you create a program that a group of students respond to?
It's absolutely dialogical, yes. So basically we are trying to collect always interested academic people who are kind of offering ideas of what they would be interested in teaching. And then we are having these meetings, summer school, winter school, and some other occasions where we are basically running through these offers and ideas with the students and also collecting what students would like to do. And we are trying to match what students are interested in, what we have offers for. And then if students have ideas that, for example, we don't have offers for, then we try to kind of locate potential professors who would be interested in teaching something like that. And then at some point when it gets identified who is the potential one or two curators. So it's important to mention, I think it's for everybody, that we don't have traditional classroom classes, obviously not only because it's online, but because every single class is taught by different professors. So the teachers, like the course directors, are more like curators, yes? So they are kind of putting together a certain intellectual framework, and every class is somehow a kind of different configuration, because like the idea was exactly to mobilize all the solidarity that is out there. Everybody is very happy to give a class. Like you can almost not find any academic in the world who would refuse to give a class to Ukrainian students. And we try to kind of create a modality which makes it possible for all these benevolence out there to be converted. Nobody would be teaching 12 classes in a row, but everybody is happy to participate in a roundtable, yes, with some other colleagues. So as a result, we basically collect, we can for a Ukrainian student sitting in the shelter in a semester, we collect all the famous people, all the important people on his or her field who exist out there. Not even a Yale or a Harvard student will ever meet all these people in a course. Yes, so basically we try to make a virtue out of necessity that these courses are actually showcasing the whole field So when we are talking about migration studies, then we collect all the people, like not all, but obviously I'm joking, but many very important people from Ukraine, from different Western academia, and the students have an opportunity to have a feedback from these people. And then we also have mentoring, which is important because like we let every student in the system, yes, because like we cannot create separate BA classes and MA classes and whatever. But then the idea is that everybody can participate. Of course, different students might have different capacity to be active participants. And then for those who want to get deeper feedback, PhD students from different institutions, originally from CU, but now from everywhere else, people offer their own time and they spend mentoring. So like basically this Oxbridge style one-to-one or small group mentoring with the students who are interested in getting extra knowledge, extra readings, extra references, and then they can also do their own project with these mentors, so they can write their own research paper and get feedback for it. So basically it becomes a kind of multi-layered framework, and in the winter school and summer school we bring always topical, so like this winter school I mentioned was for example state of emergency, and we brought people from New York to Kyiv, different scholars who are interested in democracy and state of emergency and what democracy means in a war situation. And then students have an opportunity once again to have individual consultations, roundtables. Students organize the roundtables, so it's not the professors organize the roundtables, but the students collect the professors, they moderate the discussion. So it's very, I mean, we don't really have traditional roles of professor and student. It's basically some sort of dialogue all the time.
Would only maybe add about the new adjustment to the group that was the Invisible Graduate School that was created this semester, and which I also have the honor and the role to coordinate. And what we realized is that there were a lot of students, so as Balázs mentioned, we combined BA and graduate students and also the postgraduate students, and what we realized is that there are a lot of students in need to engage in a deeper research that the normal Invisible University program and scholarships may not allow, for example. So we decided to create a different platform for them. So it was quite competitive. So I think around 50 students applied, and we chose about 27 or 30 of them to whom we gave scholarships. And they're for this semester and part of the next semester, they're writing the scholarship that is either applicable to their PhD work, so it is either a chapter for their PhD research, or they want to get into a PhD position, or they're trying to write a book chapter or publish an article. And so for that, we also try to find people in the academia who might be the most applicable to them. So we have social sciences, culture, literature studies there, and for the literature people and like urban studies, we try to find people both in Ukraine and also in Europe who can come to the one-on-one mentoring sessions and navigate them and maybe give them advices for the readings as well. So it's more like a new adjustment to the program as well.
Other questions? We'll go to you first.
Yes, how do you achieve funding for your programs, and how much of a gap is there between the funding available and what your needs and goals are?
So it's always very flexible. So it's always a very flexible program, because of course, depending on what kind of funding we have, we can extend or withdraw certain kind of modalities. So it's very much dependent on the situation. But like we have more or less stable funding coming still from the Open Society Foundation. So the basic funding is from the Open Society Foundation that comes through CU in some ways. So it's the Soros Foundation basically, and then beyond that we got the German, the DAAD, like this is the German Academic Exchange Service. They pay for exactly these scholarships that Natalia was mentioning, so we can offer German money for the students who are doing research. And then we have also some American private foundations, Mott Foundation, for example. So we always offer, for example, for foundation that they can pick a topic that is interesting for them, and they can see that their students are interested, and that we can have a negotiation whether this topic would be interesting for both sides. So for example, we have now students who said that they want to have a course about civil society, like how civil society works, what is volunteer organizations, task, how civil society and state relates to each other, and we found Mott Foundation in the States who was exactly interested in funding the course on civil society. So basically they do now a special module on civil society, and with the help of Mott Foundation, we also created internship for Ukrainian students to work with Ukrainian civil society initiatives both in Ukraine and also outside, and even make it possible to move in and out for some of the students. So some of the Ukrainians, like Natalia, who are in outside, can go back to work with and bring their experience back to Ukraine. And some of the Ukrainian students who are sitting in Ukraine can go to some Western civil society organizations and learn certain practices that they can bring back to their own organization. So we have basically this kind of modalities, and we have also some other foundations, and we also got 2 other awards apart from this marvelous brown medal, and we also convert all the awards basically to scholarships for the students. And this graduate school that Natalia mentioned is coming from a Swiss foundations funding who was willing to basically fund this.
Thank you.
So we are dependent on generosity of private funders actually.
Thank you for coming here and speaking to us. Even though the Invisible University was founded or was born of tragedy, are there any efforts underway to try to have this be a model of education that could be sustained over the long term?
Yes, so I mean, we are discussing about this a lot, and we didn't mention this, but it's an important thing that at some point when we had these classes, we also had this idea that, of course, in the beginning, of course, Ukrainian students want to hear mostly about Ukraine. Yes, I mean, like, it was very much this post-traumatic moment that you want to somehow understand your own self, your trauma, your own identity, your own everyday concerns, but very soon there were issues that were connecting them to other academic communities, and when we started to talk about post-war, as a problem, of course, in the middle of the war, but still conceptualized post-war, then we realized that bringing them together with post-Yugoslav scholars, for example, would be an important experience. And we had a very, I think Natalia can testify, that very traumatic interaction with them, because then the expectations of both sides were quite different. Yes, like post-Yugoslav scholars, for example, presumed that they were able to sustain friendly communication among the different warring sides, even though they all rejected the militarization of their societies. For Russians and Ukrainians, it doesn't work. So Ukrainian cannot say that, you know, I have a good friend in Moscow, but we both dislike our own armies. Yes, it's a completely different story. And then Yugoslav scholars didn't really understand that this is a different situation. So both sides were very traumatized in the beginning, and both sides went to drink in different pubs and kind of, you know, come to terms with this trauma. And then we realized that both sides were actually debating for days and days about what went wrong. And instead of giving up, instead of saying that, okay, it's hopeless, like they will never understand each other, both sides actually started to ask questions to the other, that, okay, I mean, like, how did you win this, what could be interesting for you? And out of this emerged basically almost a parallel Invisible University, because first we started to have courses about the Balkans for Ukrainian students, about how to understand the similarities and differences of coming to terms with the war, and of course the horrible long-term consequences of the war. And at some point, basically, there was a very enthusiastic team of former Yugoslav students, but also we found Ukrainian scholars who are interested in the Balkans, so it also became a very interesting dialogue. And at some point, we advertised this class for some former Yugoslav students, and to our complete surprise, 170 students signed up for this course. So at some point, we started to have as many Yugoslav students and Ukrainian students, and it became a kind of dialogue between the two student bodies. And now we are basically working to set up some sort of a mini Invisible University for the former Yugoslav territories, and experiment with the same methodology, but also take into account that the space is different. There is not a war. There are multiple institutional locations. Students can go from Sarajevo to Belgrade, from Belgrade to Kosovo. We can use the different institutions as kind of hubs, and we are trying to, in a way, export this method and involve new people there. And then we also we try to think whether this method can be actually a transnational method as well, and we work together with Turkish refugee scholars who are mainly in Berlin and other places. We also worked with some of the Brazilian scholars under Bolsonaro who were kind of trying to set up similar alternative institutional systems, and we try to exchange that, of course, and it's a very tricky situation. And again, you might imagine that it's not easy what to do with Russian dissident institutional networks. I mean, like, of course, we cannot have a binary Ukrainian-Russian project. I mean, it would be unacceptable for Ukrainians, and rightly so, but we also try to have some kind of dialogue with some of the Russian dissident intellectuals and try to see whether some of these models are actually convertible into that. And we are, from next semester onwards, we will have a joint IUFU course with Belarusian scholars as well, who are sitting mainly in Vilnius in this European Humanities Institute, and who are having a similar kind of, flying situation, and we try to have a common heritage, common Polish, Ukrainian, Belarusian, Lithuanian heritage together with refugee scholars from Belarus.
I will maybe just shortly add that even though we were accusing our Balkan partners of balkanization of Ukraine and trying to Balkan-splain us about what is happening, so apart from this mini invisible university for the Balkan countries, there were also a couple of initiatives that were established and that I'm sure will keep running for a long time. So an example of it is a sub-project of the Invisible University for Ukraine, which is the journal called Visible Ukraine, so a play of words, Invisible University, Visible Ukraine. And it is a web journal where we publish trans-academic, transdisciplinary researchers of students who produced them for the Invisible University who received a scholarship. Then we publish their research for it to be available on the website, so for students who have publications online. We also conduct interviews, so the most recent interview that I took part in conducting was with Dovile Sakatin, who deals with public memory policy and how it can be intertwined in the law in Baltic countries. So she herself is from Lithuania, I don't want to lie, but I think she's from Lithuania, and she was explaining that Lithuania was the first country who denounced the Soviet crimes and how it, on humanities, and how it further influenced the change making in the region. So there is this journal, and I'm quite confident that, so even the students who dropped out for some time from the whole structure of Invisible University, they still remained as editors in this journal, and we are all the time looking for the students to further engage with this. So we always say that we are you're very much welcome to propose and to publish anything you want here, and as long as it is normal and it fits in the standards of academic integrity and just it's somehow connected to Ukraine, we will publish that because we want to make Ukrainian scholars visible. Exactly. So I think it will also continue, even if IUFU for some reason disintegrates, this university, this Visible Ukraine journal will still live.
We're going to make this the last question, but Balazs and Natalia will stick around if anyone else wants to continue the conversation.
You're watching CNET, Center County's Government and Educational Access Network.
So, you want to vote in Center County? To be eligible to vote in any election, you must be registered in the county 15 days or more before said election. You can check your registration status at vote.pa.gov. Click on Register to Vote, then check your voter registration. You can register online to vote at vote.pa.gov. Click on Register to Vote, then select Register to Vote Online to complete and submit your registration online. Or, if you want a registration form mailed to you, click on Register to Vote, then Register to Vote. You can also download the form straight to your computer, print it out, and mail it directly. If you are voting for the first time in a polling location, you will be required to show ID. You can verify authorized types of ID at vote.pa.gov. Click on Voting in PA, then First-Time Voters. Additionally, if your address changes, you must update your registration. This could change the location where you go to vote. You can update your registration online as well at vote.pa.gov. Remember, if you want to vote in Center County, you must be registered in Center County for your ballot to count.